Let's talk now, though, to Dr. Benny Peiser, Director of the Global Warming Policy Forum, because it may not surprise you to know that I'm afraid the government have got a roadmap for something, but it's not how to get out of the lockdown. It's how to start taxing us even more money to raise cash for carbon, right? They want to try and get to zero carbon, and as a result, they want to try and stop you eating cheese and eating meat. Dr. Benny, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Pretty horrendous idea, this, isn't it? I mean, they can't get enough of taxing us for all sorts of fuel, for flying, for having electricity and for having fires, but now they want to tax us for eating.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's face it. If you want to reduce CO2 emissions, then the general idea of a carbon tax at the global level, where everyone basically, where we have a level playing field, would make sense. The problem, of course, is that the government wants to increase carbon taxes on top of all the other countless regulations and subsidies. We are already paying an indirect tax of about 10 billion every year on our energy bills to support the investors in renewables, all the big landowners and everyone who has a wind turbine on their land.
Right.
They are getting about 10 billion already from us in indirect subsidies. Remember, there was another very popular idea a few years back called the so-called community tax.
Oh, yes.
The tax was going to the community. People might recall it as a poll tax. It brought down Margaret Thatcher. There's a risk that this idea could backfire badly. The government can easily lose traditional voters, red wall voters, if they perceive that this money is being used not to tackle climate change, but to fill the hole in the
Well, exactly
budget.
right. Because there's no way that they're going to be able to tackle climate change with money, is there? Because what these people want to do is to change the way that we live effectively. Because I see from a report that was put out earlier on, I think towards the end of last week, the Global Warming Policy Forum published a document saying that the UK Climate Assembly, which said that it had delivered a mandate for a green revolution, actually had no such mandate at all. Because the trouble is, the difference between the poll tax, I think, Benny, and this carbon tax is that there wasn't anyone really in support of the poll tax, whereas there's an awful lot of green types in who are very happy to bring in more carbon tax.
Well, the point is that if you ask people, ordinary people, should we do something about climate change, then the vast majority will say, of course, we should do something about climate change. If you then ask, how much are you prepared to pay every month to do it, in the absence of the rest of the world doing very much about it, you will find that majority of you shrinks considerably. And that is at the bottom, and that is the real problem we have, that no matter what Britain is doing, no matter what the government is doing, the Chinese have just, in the last year, in the COVID year, opened more coal power stations, three times more coal power plants than the rest of the world together last year. So whatever we do is completely insignificant. Even what the US is doing is insignificant, as long as the developing world is trying to catch up with us, to grow, to become less poor. And of course, that requires a lot of energy.
Yes.
And they're using the cheapest energy there is.
And also, here we are, having just left the European Union, supposedly promoting British farming. And this tax is going to hurt British farmers, isn't it?
Of course. Oh, big time. So in Canada, where they have a carbon tax, the average farmer has an additional tax bill of about $150,000. Of course, one of the big questions is whether the government actually wants to pay back the money, the revenue they raise. This is the idea that basically you make things more expensive but the revenue you raise through the taxes, you basically hand back to consumers so that they're not worse off. Because otherwise, this government won't survive very long if they punish the most vulnerable people in the country by making eating more expensive and heating more expensive. I mean, millions of households struggle to pay their heating bills as it is.
Right.
And are they really, really wanting to be known as the government that punishes the most vulnerable people in the country?
Well, it is this kind of middle class obsession, though, isn't it? Boris Johnson's got the bug, I'm afraid, not least because of his the mother of his latest child, Carrie Symonds, who is obviously a green activist and doesn't really make much of an effort to hide that. But he's completely and utterly bought, sold, and paid for by the green lobby, isn't he?
Well, this is part of the problem. They live in the Westminster bubble.
Yeah.
They tax the poor and give the money to the wealthy electric car buyers. I mean, you know, you get £3,000-4,000 if you want to buy an electric car.
Yeah.
You will be handed that money directly by the government. Whereas if you drive a diesel or a petrol car, you'll get punished because your car will be worthless soon because it's being basically phased out. The same, think about housing. Think about the ridiculous idea of ripping out all gas heating within the next 10, 15 years.
Right.
Never mind the cost of complete insulation. You'll be punished. I mean, think about the people who live in these high-rise cladded housing. I mean, all the cladding was started, the whole idea of insulating the high-rise was all about energy efficiency and reducing CO2 emissions. Most of these flats are almost unsellable.
Yes, and nobody mentions that, do they?
The same will happen to half of the UK housing stock. Old houses will essentially become worthless because you can't sell them.
Yeah.
You cannot sell your house anymore because you are no longer kind of, you know, your house hasn't got the kind of energy efficient stamp. And so therefore no one wants to buy it.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Dr. Benny Peiser, we've got to run because we're out of time, but thank you very much indeed, Director of the Global Warming Policy Forum. Another voice of common sense for this show here, which is the home of common sense, because let's face it, you know, there is no way this government is going to achieve zero carbon. We've got this ridiculous climate conference going on up in Glasgow later on this year, which will, of course, have a massive carbon footprint because loads of people are flying in from all over the world to tell us to stop flying. What a collection of absolute planks. This is Talk Radio.